See, we got ready on the left, ready on the right. Our video is going. Okay, let's call the meeting to order. This is the Calaveras Council of Governments meeting, Wednesday, October 1st. We're here in the Board of Supervisors chambers. I would ask you all to rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, items 1 and 2 on our agenda this evening are consent agenda items, generally considered to be routine and non-controversial, and are generally enacted in one motion by the board. Unless any member of the board, the public, or staff wants to pull an item from consent prior to the vote for further discussion. Does any member of the board or staff want to pull an item from consent? Any member of the public want to pull an item from consent? Chair is open to a motion on the entirety of the consent agenda items 1 and 2.
So moved.
Councilmember Ponte moved the item. Second by Councilmember Morris. I'll call for the vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? None noted. That passes unanimously. Item number 3 on our agenda is public comment. This is the time for the public to address the board on any matter that's not already agendized for discussion and possible action. So I'll limit the discussion to 5 minutes per person, 15 minutes per topic. Is there any public comment this evening before the board? Okay, none noted. We'll move to item number 4. This is our strategic planning presentation and facilitated discussion by Mr. Boyer. Do you want to set that up at all, or should we just go directly to Matt?
Perfect. I'd like to just go directly to Matt. As the council is aware, we have facilitated several processes along the strategic planning process. That started with the policy conference. Matt's going to give a brief overview of those steps. But most recently, we had an opportunity to meet with your executive level staff at the City of Angels and the county, as well as our executive management committee. And I think Matt is going to cover all of these details more thoroughly in his presentation. So with that, I'd like to introduce Matt Boyer of Boyer & Associates. Thank you, Matt.
Okay, Matt, as I understand it, this is going to be about a 30-minute agenda item. So between you and I, we'll watch the time closely, and I won't cut off debate if there is a real interest in the board, but if we could kind of tailor it to about 30 minutes, that would be helpful.
I think we can do that.
Thank you.
In fact, a little under the weather tonight, so if I seem a little less talkative than normal, just chalk it up to that. But any questions that you have, I'd be happy to answer those.
All right.
So as a quick background, I think we talked at the beginning of your last discussion about the COGS core functions. Tonight we're just going to touch on those. We'll touch on the policy conference. We'll touch on the items that came from you all to me at your first facilitated discussion, and then talk a little bit about the input from the executive management group, and then the bulk of my presentation will be focused on my suggestions for draft or for goals and recommendations. So the core COG functions, I think you're all very aware: long-range transportation planning, administration of the Transportation Development Act, all the planning and programming of state and federal transportation dollars. You know, if I was to summarize the takeaways from the April policy conference in one set of bullets, Will Kempton's overarching theme that what we're going to see in the next 10 years in terms of transportation finance is like nothing we've probably ever seen in the history of California. Rural counties facing particular challenges. Caltrans point, Diana Bordner's, that with the limited dollars and a lot more prescription associated with how those dollars can be used, now's the time to really start reassessing project priorities and aligning those priorities with the funding sources that do exist. There are still opportunities for out-of-the-box solutions. One example you heard from the City of Placerville, the Main Street Matters program that was initially tied to the Benjamin Moore repaint a few buildings downtown. The citizens group that got together to build on that and progress with other things like a common PA system and et cetera, is continuing to roll. And they've got a private economic development Corporation, working with them on some creative financing. So it's pretty interesting to see what can still be done, but in ways that maybe we haven't done them for many, many years. Partnerships that result in joint efforts and efficiencies more important than ever. So if I was to summarize the takeaways from the conference, I think those are the big thematic elements. These are the bullets that we took that Amber noted from your prior discussions. We tried to take those and fit them into these goals and objectives. So we may harken back to this if you have a question, but I think we've basically been able to cover how we would recommend addressing each one of those. And then we did go first with that list of bullet items that came from you as the COG board, met with the Technical Advisory Committee, so as you know, that's jurisdictional staff from the City and County Transit, and to the Executive Management Group. And to that group, we added Caltrans District 10 to provide Dennis Agar, the new District 10 Director, was a very excellent addition and participant to that meeting. So there's two graphics that I wanted to present at the beginning of this discussion for you all to think about. So in terms of this continuum, on the left-hand side, those really represent the basic core COG functions. And if we look at your sister agencies up and down the state of California, many of them branch out into additional areas of responsibility, and they start moving towards the right-hand side of that continuum and something that's much more robust. But there's nothing prescribed about what you should do or shouldn't do. It's just a graphic to say, yeah, you're going to have your basic responsibilities. Are there some other things to move you to a more robust work program and responsibility here in the community? The really big recommendation that I'd make is that whatever you might decide tonight or in the months to come based on this should be something that's got strong degree of buy-in at the board, strong degree of buy-in with the city and the county. Start small and then move forward as it looks like it's appropriate. Because what you really want to avoid is the pendulum swing, where every 2 or 3 years I can pick agencies in other areas where you'll ebb and you'll flow and you'll get more into certain topics and then less. And really, that's not only not efficient for the agency, it's generally not very efficient for the community members or the local jurisdictions. So again, as we talk about this, keep in mind, what we think would be a sustainable course of action. So from the input that you provided in June, we developed 4 specific goals. Enhance the COG's role as a convener, further develop interagency relationships, and we'll break each one of these down in a moment and talk about both what the outcomes are intended to be and some of the steps that we would go through to implement that. Second category, align existing priority projects with expected financing programs. The third, support improved project delivery, primarily with the local jurisdictions or with Caltrans. And number 4, support and grow economic development. And the notes on the bottom really, really important. The nature of these objectives as we get into them are going to necessarily focus on processes versus really prescriptive direct outcomes, because you're really the petri dish, and as we move into these things, developing the partnerships will lead to much more sustainable initiatives. And then the silver bullet objectives are really unlikely to succeed. There is no magic bullet for any one of these topics, but each one of these, in order to gather some momentum, keep your eyes open for the really quick wins and things that, as a group convenes, we realize, yeah, we can take X, Y, and Z, and those may be 6-month to 3-year initiatives, but here's a couple of things we can do in the next 2 months. And those kind of things grow momentum like you wouldn't believe. The CAO pointed out during the discussion of the Executive Management Group that really all of these 4 goals and objectives are all interconnected. So to some degree you could, project delivery would support economic development, aligning funding supports project delivery, etc. So to break these down, the first goal, enhance COG's role as a convener, further develop interagency relationships. What are the really tangible outcomes? Trust building, I think, is huge. I think we've heard that from the local agency staff. We heard that again at the executive management group. That's trust interagency, it's trust with communities. Again, another reason to not move too quickly. When developed, trust really requires incremental steps and buy-in. Increased efficiencies through joint efforts, identification of specific initiatives that can be advanced jointly. So what are some of the steps that we would go through to do that? Each one of these, and I'm going to break this slide into two. So slightly different when we talk about intra-county, within this county, Calaveras, versus the next we'll talk about inter-county. First key is really to identify, per topic, who are the relevant partners. And you want to go a little too far, then a little too skinny in terms of making sure that you have all the correct players at the table. One of the things that I've noticed was done in Merced County, was done in El Dorado County while I was there. They would do low cost or almost no cost, spaghetti feeds once or twice a year, and that would be for the local elected officials, the community members. Might be oriented around a topic. Usually it moved from one jurisdiction to another, and it was just a way to bring people out of the normal ways that you interact into a venue that was semi-social, that allowed for conversations to occur about issues, and it's a petri dish. Usually those events, they preserve a little bit of time for table talk. The staff would be, kind of keep their eyes and ears without formal notes or anything, but listening actively for conversations that might bear some fruit. And again, in an organic setting, it's amazing the kinds of things that can arise. So examples, additional use of GIS systems, joint procurements, ways to combine road surface treatment projects into joint bids. These are all examples of things that have come out in other jurisdictions. And then inter-county, very similar. Again, it may be specific to a topic. Melissa does a lot of this informally already. Identify who those partners are. Those are generally going to be your neighboring counties. In a few cases, it may be similar size jurisdictions that are facing similar issues if you were dealing with a legislative matter. Again, convening people, identifying 3 or 4 joint initiatives, and then reports back on success stories and status reports. So the COG as a convener, I think, is a no-brainer. I think you do a lot of that work already, but it's amazing when you formalize it and you say, we're actually going to do this. Gives Melissa a little bit more freedom and a little bit of a different mindset day to day about, okay, we're going to take our natural talents and we're going to move into this convening direction. So let me stop and say, stop after goal 1 and just say, questions or comments.
Anyone?
No, actually, I think it's really good forward thinking.
I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't spent the last 26 years working for joint powers authorities or doing facilitation. I wouldn't have thought that process-oriented approach would have worked. I came out of school as a poli-sci major. It absolutely works, and the things that come out of it are remarkable. Second goal, align existing priority projects with expected financing programs. This is really key because of the direction the state and federal government looks like it's going in redefining financing programs, certainly as money's become more scarce. We talked at the policy conference and a little bit at your last meeting about the active transportation program, and this was a new program the legislature had created a year and a half ago by lumping together about 5 or 6 historic programs into one very large one. But as the guidelines were written, it became, the telegraphing from the state was that this was going to be very, the projects that were financed were going to be very outcome-based, measurable, tangible results. And most of us that work closely with rural communities are thinking, all right, so our ability to impact public health, our ability to impact air quality and other environmental is much less than it's going to be in a very urbanized area. When the results of the application ranking came out, it was pretty clear that's exactly what they did. There was no attempt to, make everybody happy by giving them a little bit of anything. And that's traditionally what's happened in California, even in the more extreme moments. So I do think it really has forced all of us to say, all right, if that's the new reality, then we really have to figure out which of our long-standing priority projects fit with these funding sources. And putting a pretty lipstick on them or a little gold star is not going to be good enough. They may have to be fundamentally the same, but also rebranded and repackaged and rethought about and sold to the reviewing agencies in a way that we've never had to do before.
We're still talking about transit here?
This is active transportation program, so a lot of it was bicycle, pedestrian, safe routes to schools projects.
All right.
So the outcomes we're trying to get to here is revised project lists that have a high degree of fundability, interagency support, including Caltrans for priority projects, list of priority projects with a low level of likely financing from existing sources or low support to be deliverable need to be identified, and strategies to get those projects done in a non-traditional way need to be identified. And then each of the projects needs to have as much of a strategic approach to delivering them as possible. So an example of that's come up at every level, the Technical Advisory Committee and at the Executive Management Group, was this bus shelter program and the idea that that's a key piece of the supporting infrastructure for public transit. It's not something that is being done in a comprehensive way currently, and it really needs some organization to own it, move it forward, and make it happen. So in terms of the steps, this is relatively straightforward. Identify the funding programs, identify the existing priorities. Honestly, look at the competitiveness of those projects to compete for those dollars. Engage the project sponsors in discussions where those are necessary to rescope, downsize, or otherwise rebrand projects to make them more competitive. And then perhaps even identify new projects that might just be more competitive. But it's really important to do some house cleaning at this point and identify and call them what they are in terms of their ability to compete for these funding sources.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
You were talking about the bus shelters, right? And you said that they are identified as a certain project. And what did you mean by they would have to be taken over by another entity or agency or something?
Do you want to talk about that?
Well, I think for the bus shelter project and perspective, and why that's a good example and kind of looking at alternative ways for funding, is the ongoing maintenance of bus shelters. So oftentimes that we'll hear from Public Works that a lot of their challenge just isn't funding the initial capital project, but then it's the ongoing maintenance. And then I think part of the strategy is looking at the opportunity for some of those local partnerships and alternative ways of funding those types of projects. So maintenance could be a good example where we have nonprofit organizations that could enter into agreements with the county to provide for that type of service, where it might alleviate some other competitive funding that the county could leverage to do added capital projects. So I think that that was the point with the example.
So after it's built?
Right, yeah.
And so is there a time limit on is it like, like some of the Prop 40 grants, you had to show maintenance after? Is there a time limit on that, or is it like forever? Or is it just an agreement with, say, Public Works or Parks and Recreation or something like that?
Depending on the transportation funding source, some sources like the Transportation Development Act doesn't really have a maintenance minimum maintenance of effort or level of effort. On most federally funded projects, they're deemed to have a 20 to 40-year life, depending on those, and so I think the implicit obligation would run with that duration, but nowadays we don't build facilities that last just that long. We're trying to build them to be in perpetuity.
And I think the San Andreas project was a little bit of the impetus of the discussion, looking at the opportunity to look at this local project, the bus shelter, the approved county design, and then the community's vision for what that project would look like. And the San Andreas project, which we still haven't given up on the idea of being able to do that once we're through the drought and we're able to approve landscaping projects again through Caltrans. But the idea was that the community had envisioned some landscaping, some different design features around the bus stop that they could identify with their community. So the county was able to work with them and say, if you can generate the local support for this added project and then provide for the maintenance, ongoing maintenance, then we have a deal. So I think that those are sort of the opportunities that the COG could play a role in facilitating and then providing for when we look at capital projects throughout the county.
So the third goal is one that is becoming fairly common amongst COGs up and down the state of California, and that's tearing off of the COG's responsibilities to work with Caltrans on the timely delivery of projects. And certainly COG is as the lead in terms of trying to secure new discretionary grants. One of the things that's becoming more and more common in grant applications is what's your success rate in delivering projects that you've gotten financing for in the past. So it's a natural role for the COGs to play. And it generally is seen as sort of a neutral, an advisor, a problem solver. Melissa and I were talking about a couple of projects last week and her bringing her problem solver mindset to that. It would involve expanding the progress reports that are on the COG website to cover a broader array of projects. The executive management group liked the idea of doing annual reports to the city council and the board of supervisors based on the status, the delivery status of key projects. And ultimately, the bottom line is getting projects done. So how do we do that?
I'd like to see more than an annual report,
You would like to see that?
more than,
More than one annual report, like semi-annual?
at the very least. At least until we can get to a point where we're back on track again. So that I can, follow Robert around.
Yeah, no, I think that there's great wisdom in that. I would say at first, you may find that after doing it semi-annual, that even more frequent is beneficial, but I suspect at the beginning, just knowing the nature of what it's like the first ones will be a little bit rough around the edges, and so the more it's going to take a little time to work kinks out of the system, and probably more than semi-annual would be not a good use of people's time, but eventually it may be something where it could be done in a quarterly presentation at the same time that it's updated on the website.
They'll decide what it needs to be. I'm just saying right now, there's been a couple of things that caught me by surprise.
Right.
And I don't really care for that because it puts me in high speed. I'm not a fast mover, so.
Absolutely. So the steps, first and foremost, I think for Melissa to be the help desk on project delivery. So when a local project sponsor has an issue or an issue arises, they're calling Melissa. One of the roles that maybe even is appropriate on some projects where there's a project development team is to have Melissa be a part or COG staff be a part of the meetings where she can identify, hey, yeah, that's going to be a financing issue or that's going to be a right-of-way issue, and just be another voice of proactive problem solving in the moment. Need to formalize an understanding amongst the agencies about how this is going to be done so that it's not seen as a punitive thing. It's really about getting projects done and bringing in the skills and expertise that COG can bring. But that can go badly if it's not framed correctly. First quarterly report, ideally the end of this calendar year. First annual report by the end of June, although we certainly could do that sooner if the board's desires to do it a couple of times a year. And then lastly, COG to add a work element to its work program, and it should not say obtain, but it's just to provide specialized project delivery expertise. I don't know that it's envisioned that you would have to go hire a consultant to do this, or so it would just be COG providing the service. And then the last goal, and certainly the most ambitious, is support and grow economic development. So what are the outcomes? One is to provide a focal point around specific and measurable tasks related to economic development. Two, dedicate existing COG resources to advance those efforts. And one of the conversations that came up in the executive management group specifically was related to the county general plan. So it's not another expertise or perspective on the content of the general plan. It's support for the moving forward and getting the general plan in place, that all of the outcomes that come from having a new general plan will be able to be gained. And then last, identify infrastructure and other hindrances to economic growth and develop, the partnerships, potentially some realistic legislative relief and some other creative things to get out and really problem solve in a way that typically city and county staffs don't have the time or the focus to be able to do. You're sort of in it and you realize there's some barriers, but you just keep plowing through. So I think COG being a home for that allows for that 50,000 foot perspective to say, hang on for a second, I know 14 other counties that are struggling with this, and even though the legislature is not necessarily real Calaveras friendly right now, I think we could develop some legislative relief around a couple of requirements. So again, COG is a problem solver. Objectives and steps, there's some one-on-one conversations to be had with public and private stakeholders to really figure out what the economic development niche for COG would be. So this is a little bit of a slow burn because again, you want to roll this out after it's, or really start moving forward on this once there's some consensus on what the goals and objectives are. I really like the idea of doing a no or low cost summit around this issue. It's sort of similar without the bells and whistles to the policy conference that you had on transportation. Identify the infrastructure and other hindrances that are there and develop the partnerships to address those. And then identify opportunities to facilitate partnerships similar to that Placerville Main Street Matters. It's something that we all got out of the mode of doing probably 20 or 30 years ago for a variety of good reasons. But that's how all of our communities in the foothills were created. They're created by the neighbors coming together and doing the old-fashioned barn raising. And I think there's some strong arguments to be made why that's a big part of our future in these areas. So those are the 4 goals. Those are the objectives and steps. I think the next steps are really for you to respond, provide some direction to me or Melissa. What do you like, what don't you like?
I actually like to go home.
Yeah?
Yeah, could I get an electronic copy?
Absolutely. I apologize, I'm a little brain fogged tonight. So.
I'm doing good.
So any other questions or comments or possible discussion on this item? Well, let me just say, we've been working on this now for the better part of 3 or 4 months, and I think we have made significant progress. I mean, to me, the last one, step number 4, economic development, for this county, to me, and whatever this board can do towards that, I still think is the most essential step we can take. So I don't know how we do that, but and I don't even know that you can make it a part of this presentation at some point, wherever it goes from here. But I still see the critical step that needs to happen is the adoption of a new general plan. Once we get that, a lot of these steps for economic development will naturally fall into place. But as long as that continues to kind of hang out there with whatever level of community support there is for the inclusion of community plans, I think continues to hamper whatever progress we're making towards economic development in this county. So I would continue to make that the highest priority going forward. When we talked in the executive management group about how this presentation was going to go, I think you hit the high points, Matt, and I appreciate that. But I would also, stress that it's still my interest, to become, the sort of de facto convener agency for the county. I mean, if we can put players together and start talking about regional collaboration, we're going to be talking about transit later on. I saw that was one of the possibilities moving forward of trying to get our transit under control. Well, maybe we need to really start taking a look at more, regional approaches to things. So however we can take whatever next steps there are. I mean, I think economic development is number one. Being a convener agency for the entire county is number two, and working on regional collaborations, that can address economies of scale to where we can't do that for ourselves, I think is very, very important. So those would be my comments on what I've seen gathered from the process over the next 90, or the past 90, 120 days since we got involved doing this. And I think you've done a very good job. You've been a great facilitator. Now it's up to us to take this and work with it. I've been to too many facilitated projects, like this, where we come all the way to the end and we have something that looks like we can build a car with it, but then we never build the car. We've got the roadmap, but we never get the tools out of the box to actually make the next step. And I would hope that there's a way to do that. So I'm going to just look to staff to make sure that wherever you go with this, it continues to be highlighted. I think Councilmember Edson had a good point. Whatever we do, if you just have an annual report, it's too easy to forget about what it is that we've done. I think it needs to probably be a quarterly report, even though it might be difficult for staff to get their hands around it now. But if you don't do something, I guarantee it, if I'm not here or somebody else isn't here, we're going to just forget about this, and the work that we've done to this point never has any maturity. So those would be my kind of generic comments, and I'd look for anyone else.
More like a training process.
Yeah, if you don't take the steps, what we've done is for naught. So Jim, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, following up on that and the necessity of doing more than talking and actually implementing and making things happen, does the COG staff have the resources and the expertise necessary to move forward with these goals with our existing staff?
I believe that we do, and I think we'll know more as we move towards implementation. We've already started to evaluate these goals and objectives, look towards this work program, and see how we can start incorporating them. I think you'll notice some subtle changes in the work program amendment that you have before you. I think that we also, as the Council of Governments, have the unique ability to rely on resources and skill sets outside of our organization. So in terms of the project delivery opportunity, we've been working and looking for opportunities to work with Charles Field in Amador. That's an area where he's hired full-time staff to assist his local jurisdictions. We might have the opportunity to partner with him if we have a local jurisdiction that needs help advancing a project. So I think that there's opportunities with SJCOG. They provide us with staff augmentation support. So I think the Council of Governments, just the unique nature of our organization, has the ability to cast a net that really goes beyond just our existing staff and our skill sets. And so that's, I think, my commitment now is, if we don't have the resources, to look to the resources. If we're not able to find those within our existing means, then to come to the Council of Governments and let you know what the need and the priority is. That would be it. Yeah.
How big is your, do you have any connection with RCRC at all?
You know what? I do not go to RCRC meetings. I go to rural counties task force meetings. They're composed of the rural RTPAs. And so I do know that they share a lot of common issues. But typically the rural RTPAs will speak as one voice through the rural counties task force.
Do you think in terms of these goals, there might be some benefits to Melissa at least occasionally going to RCRC meetings?
I think so,
Yeah.
because they tackle all kinds of stuff.
Mhm.
Who is the RCRC rep on your board?
Marita.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. It would give you also exposure to a different set of players that might be relevant in some of the topics that we mentioned here.
Yeah, I just got back, last week I went to their annual meeting, and it was really informative. You know, there was subjects I didn't know they were going to talk about, and they had a lot of good resources there. Plus, they have really good collaboration between all of the counties, the rural counties, and that it's a pretty decent voice. I mean, they stick together pretty good too. And you know, I didn't see a whole lot of talk there. I was kind of surprised at that actually, or maybe I just wasn't looking because I was looking for something else. But to me, it's a perfect place because it's, instead of having 10 different things, you know, you're coming in and you're combining and you're becoming that one thing.
Right.
One thing I've noticed throughout all of the things, all the issues I've been dealing with here lately, is a lot of times you'll have 30 or 40 different groups working on the same thing, only in a small way, and nobody connects the dots. And so the RCRC is a good way to connect those dots.
Right.
Of course, we have an expert in RCRC right here on our board. Jim Heminger was there for many years.
Yeah.
And
Vice
headed
President.
up that, yes, you were. So, I mean, I'm sure that Jim would echo those sentiments. I mean, so if you're not involved with RCRC and actually even CSAC, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity out
Both,
there.
really.
And, yeah, you got to get involved. Jim, did you want to follow up on the RCRC comment at all? Or?
No, I think it's very good. It's always been difficult. The rural county COG group in RCRC, when George was involved, we actually started working more closely
George
together.
Bandera.
Yes, and I would, when I was working with RCRC, attend those meetings and had a little cross-pollination, if you will. There is a little different perspective from COGS versus who sees RCRC as the county. And they don't always see the interests as coincidental, if I could say that. Not every COG is as friendly to the county and vice versa, perhaps, as we are. So there is a little jurisdictional issue. But that being said, it's been bridged in the past, and I could actually work with Melissa and see if RCRC actually has been reaching out more.
Why don't you do that, Jim? Because, I mean, you're our resident expert in that way, and I mean, I think you could open some doors for Melissa if you thought that was appropriate to do, because there's a vast world of rural, you know, help out there. I mean, even the Rural Caucus at CSAC, like I said, is a big player in Sacramento, so it's something that we should, you know, get involved with. I would support that as well. So, any other comments?
I just find that, you know, I kind of echo everything that's been said so far. And one of the things is with these reports is the accountability, because boards change and people change and come and go, and it's hard to follow projects. And I think that's why we've kind of gotten some black eyes on project delivery. And so the annual report is nice, but I think something that's a little bit more frequent is helpful, because I think it holds everybody accountability, and including boards, to staff, to our working relationships. And the other thing I see where COG is a key player is that regionalization approach, because we're all too small to be independent. And as you said, with funding sources, they aren't looking at that anymore. They don't like that anymore.
Right.
They're looking at cooperative working relationships. And, you know, I know we represent Calaveras County, but it's really a region when you start looking at things. And, you know, the whole transit system to me could be a big part of that, and the economic development factor. And, you know, for us in the county, it's the general plan, and then how does that general plan fit into what the city is? Because we have this big vast of county surrounding a city, and we're too small just to think county and city. We really have to network better in that regards. And then how does this general plan kind of fit into more of the region? So, you know, it's really kind of thinking out of the box, because for many, many years, we've thought in our little narrow boundary or box or whatever it is. So, you know, I kind of echo the comments here and being able to kind of be that far-reaching thinker, you might say. And, you know, it takes something to kind of drive that. And I think COG is in a good position to do that, and with the staff as well as the other outside resources that they know of, and the skill sets and things along that line.
So in that case, we would probably have, the COG would have to agree to that, and then it'd have to go to the board to agree, right? Yeah, see, and that's an advantage really for all of us. When we came into office, it's like you have a million things coming at you at one time. You don't really understand all of it for a while. And so you go to Public Works, say for instance, and you go, okay, what about this project? You wouldn't understand what they're talking about if they told you. But if we had a report that says, yep, you guys are right on track, quarterly, I can understand that. And then that also brings in the accountability, okay? I think it also takes the pressure off of COG, because boards can be a little bit domineering sometimes, right? And so if there's something in place that says, here's a report, here's a report, here's a report, that has to come out, then it's less likely that there's going to be an influence to prevent certain information from coming out. And I think it's, you know, and I think we got in trouble there a little bit. So I just like the idea of having that.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, well, I'm not sure we're clear. We're giving clear direction to staff, but I'll leave it to Melissa and you to work out some next steps. I mean, I think you're getting.
I'd like to hear from the city, see what they think, because
Well, I offer
You want
it
to
up.
hear what I'll say what I still think, and all the reports and everything are great, but your cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships with the community and other agencies and Caltrans and project delivery are the most important issues in order to move forward with economic development.
Agreed, thank you.
Anyone else?
That's my comment.
Any comment from the public on this item? Okay, it's not an action item, we're under discussion. So Melissa, again, I'm going to leave this to you and Matt to come up with an appropriate kind of final summary on what we've talked about. And I would like to see that report come back at some point with what you consider the next steps to what we've accomplished over the last, 10 months.
Very good.
All right, anyone else on this item? Okay, very good. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hope you feel better soon. You did a good job under duress. Nice going. Doesn't feel good, yeah. Didn't notice it though, did you? Pretty amazing. Okay, let's go to item number 5. Ms. Raggio is bringing this, minute order approving fiscal year 2014-15 operation budget amendment number 1.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This item is, like you said, the fiscal year 2015 operations budget amendment 1. Staff is recommending that council approve the minute order. This amendment reflects changes that the board has already previously taken action on. They're incorporated into the attachment and broken down by line item. And if the council has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. The total increase to the operations budget that was approved in June totals a $17,000 increase. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
I have one.
Yes, go ahead, Russ.
Well, like you say, the increases in expenditures are rather minor, 17,000. However, on the revenue side, you make some major adjustments on the revenue sources. And why was that necessary?
On the bottom of the...
Yeah.
So what I'm reflecting is the total cost of our operations budget. I'm showing you, which you'll see in the overall work program later in the agenda. These are the exact dollar amounts from these funding sources that are going to fund the total operations budget. So when we go through, That's why we do an amendment 1 to the overall work program, because we don't know the carryover by project, and sometimes we utilize a different funding source. So in some instances, for the short-range transit plan, we utilized LTF dollars. When we figured out the carryover, then we utilized rural planning assistance funds.
So this is really related to this later.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just wanted to highlight for you how we are going to pay for the total operations budget out of the funding programs that we have in our overall work program.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
when we do our final, what we approve is our final budget, that's really to get a final budget and our overall work program to Caltrans according to their deadline, so we can enter into the OWPA and all of those agreements to start reimbursable dollars. But that's really based on estimates because we haven't closed our year end. The first overall work program amendment is really our actual budget. Everything else prior to that, it's just estimates.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so you'll see in item number 6, actually, Wes, there's revenue carryover in amendment number 1 that we're going to be talking
yeah.
about next.
Yeah, I just was concerned why there was very little discussion of the revenue side of this in this report.
Any other questions or comments on item number 5? This is a minute order. Is there any public comment on this item? Chair is open to a motion on item number 5.
I'll make a motion.
A motion by Councilmember Ponte, second by Councilmember Edson. I'll call for the vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That passes unanimously. Item number 6, Ms. Raggio, this is your item as well. We'll probably take both of these concurrently. I see no reason to bifurcate it. So resolution fiscal year 1505 adopting the 1415 overall work program amendment number 1, and resolution 1516 approving fiscal year 2014 planning, programming, and monitoring expenditure plan. So if you would lead us through that discussion, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as Melissa Eads was explaining, we try to submit our final overall work program and operations budget to get to Caltrans on time in June. And when we really go through our year-end numbers, we compile the amendment, and the amendment are our reflection of our total carryover and year-end balances. So staff is recommending the council approve this. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'd also like to point out that the changes from the final, I've highlighted, we have 5 new work elements, and these are from, we were talking about our strategic planning. We've tried to incorporate some work elements to research and progress that work over this fiscal year. And if anyone has any questions?
Is everybody clear on what these 2 items are doing? Questions or comments at this time? Does the public have any comment on item number 6, inclusive of resolution A and B? Chair is open to a motion on this item. Go ahead, Debbie.
I'd just like to comment, it seems as though it's not that far off from an estimate to what it is.
We'll be
So,
trying to
yeah.
stay as close as possible.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good.
Carryover was very close. You
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah.
That's good to point out. Very good. Okay, Chair is open to a motion on this item.
So moved.
Okay, Councilmember Gomes makes the motion.
I'll second that.
Councilmember Combs seconds the motion. I'll call for the vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? None noted. That passes unanimously as well. Okay, let's see. Ms. Raggio, you were still up with item number 7. This is a funding allocation action. We've got resolutions approving the allocation of the local transportation fund for fiscal year 2014 and 15, and then B is resolution 15-10 approving the allocation of regional surface transportation STIP programs for 2014 and 15. And so we've already adopted the previous resolution, so we can go ahead and move on this one as well.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What staff is requesting is the approval of the local transportation fund allocations to fund the overall work program. These 3 resolutions identify LTF that will be needed, and that is reflected in the OWP under the LTF. The county auditor gave the estimate this year at $845,000, and from that, these are the order that we take the funding. So we'll be funding the overall work program for $229,000 as required by TDA, a 2% bike and ped deposit to the bike and ped fund. And then we have our transit reserve, which is 10% of the estimate, or the difference to retain the balance within the fund. So $16,915 will go to the bike and ped fund. The $1,078 will be retained in that fund as the unapportioned reserve, and the total of that is
578, the last paragraph.
83. It was 83.5, and then we're adding a 1,078 to bring it up to the 10%. If council has any questions?
Okay, and again, as noted, this item number A is 3 separate resolutions, which we will take all together. Is there any questions or comments on this item? Do you want to talk about item number B, or do you want to take them separately?
I can go on to item B.
Why don't you go ahead to item B, and we'll take one motion and adopt that all at one time.
So item B is the Regional Surface Transportation Program, which this is RSTP funding. And for funding this overall work program, we have identified $177,000 to fund COG projects and our operations budget. If the council has any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Okay, questions or comments from the board at this time? Everyone clear? Questions or comments from the public at this time on this item? There's 4 resolutions we're about to vote on. None noted. Chair is open to a motion on all of these items.
So
Councilmember Morris makes the motion and
I'll second.
second by Councilmember Ponte. Is there further discussion? Call for the vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? None noted. Okay, that passes unanimously as well. We'll move then to item number 8, discussion of the fiscal year 2014-15 Partnership Planning Grant, Sustainable Communities Grant, and direction to assist the county and city with applications to October 31st. Ms. Eads, our director, executive director, will lead this discussion.
Thank you. The council is aware of the Caltrans Transportation Planning grant opportunities that come each year. The city and county has proposed 3 projects. The city's proposed to complete their Angels Camp Main Street plan. It's an application that they applied for last year, and they have requested the COG support in reviewing the application, updating that application, and providing some support for the application as the Calaveras Council of Governments. The county has proposed 2 applications. It would be for the San Andreas State Route 49 corridor enhancement and local circulation plan. That would be a project that looks at State Route 49 south of Mountain Ranch Road, specifically focusing on that commercial industrial corridor, local circulation network to support, and then also working to advance the state goals for multimodal transportation enhancements. The third application is the potential for a watershed management plan. All of the scopes of works are currently being developed between myself and city and county staff. I think the city has advanced their scope much farther than we have on both of the county projects, because this is an existing priority and application that they want to continue to support and try to advance. So I will continue to work with city and county staff with your direction on these applications and submit them on October 31st with letters of support from the Calaveras Council of Governments. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but assisting our local jurisdictions in the acquisition of funding is a primary objective of the Calaveras Council of Governments. And so I look forward to continuing to do that with your direction.
All right. Any comments on this item? Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the watershed management plan and how that relates to transportation?
Sure. So we actually had an opportunity to meet with Supervisor Edson, Supervisor Wright, Chair Stein, and CAO Lori Norton to talk about this and to talk about the connection between the transportation planning grant and if there was a nexus there. I think from my perspective as executive director, we looked at the opportunity to sort of play the role now of convener and see if there is an opportunity to bring these diverse groups who are involved in watershed management issues and sort of convene those groups and putting together an action plan or an implementation plan. And I actually shouldn't speak too much further about the scope because I'm working on the development of that as Supervisor Edson develops the project and the application. So if it's okay, I'd like to turn it over to Supervisor Edson, who has more details about the scope.
Sure. So I've been spending the past year and 8 months trying to figure out what we could do up here economically besides tourism and a very limited amount of ag. And turns out that I don't think we could do a whole lot more than that. So you look at your natural resources in the county and where we've been in the history of the county, and California has always benefited from natural resources from Calaveras County. First it was the gold, then it was the timber, then it was mining, asbestos, copper, and cement, and now it's water. So they take it, they don't pay for it, and
Or not for it.
huh?
Or not.
Well, we don't get paid for it. So then I thought, okay, well, I started doing a little research on that, and between we have 6 watersheds in the county. We have 3 major rivers in the county, and it goes into 3 reservoirs, which serves about 5 million customers. 5 million customers. And so what ends up happening is they put all kinds of restrictions on us around that, so that we keep it clean, keep the watershed clean that's existing, and that we're going to be pretty limited on our growth, I'm pretty sure. They aren't going to let us get too big, that's for darn sure, because we are a major source for San Joaquin County. So we do surface water for about 5 million customers, but that doesn't include the water that goes into the aqueduct and the groundwater recharge in the San Joaquin Basin. That's a lot. They're a little bit scared right now because they're pulling salt water at 13 feet in Tracy. That's our, San Joaquin County is California's bread and butter when it comes to its agriculture. It's a very, very large economy. So then I thought, well, okay, how can we make money on that? Because we certainly aren't now, not at all. And so I come up with an old idea from many people, actually. And I talked to this gentleman, his name is Dan Irving. Dan Irving is 91 years old now, and he used to be a farm advisor for Calaveras County back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And he developed a range management plan, and hydrology was a part of that plan. So the hydrology that he was measuring was how can we get more water off of the current land without destroying it, with enhancing the land still, keeping it good range, keeping it good habitat, because we've got to be here a long time. Just like in Europe, they've been living on that land for over 800 years, right? And it still works for them. We are in a death dive right now. We have forest fires that are devastating our state, and we're running out of water, basically, in a lot of places because of drought and many other things. Well, there's a lot of reasons for that, but if you manage your watershed properly, you can actually get a greater yield of water out of it. In a forest area, you can get between 9 and 34% greater yield of water just by managing the forest the way it should be managed, and it'll be healthier besides. The meadows will come back. Your trees won't be competing for water, so there'll be a lot less dying trees and a lot less forest fires, about 80% less if you were to manage it correctly. Not too far the other way, right? Because that pendulum gets people in trouble. So for the range, Nobody's really done a lot of work on the range, but Dan did. And so I've been researching some of the range research that people have done, and turns out there are quite a few papers on it that have been documented the hydrology in the range. And that includes, a real simple example of that is it rains here, it snows up there. The snow stays up there because it's snow. It rains here and it goes away because it's rain, right? So it either runs down a creek real quick, which also includes erosion, or it goes into the ground or into a river, and not much into the ground because mostly it's running into a river or creek somewhere. It goes into the reservoirs. Well, the reservoirs also get loaded with silt. So there's all kinds of problems around us not taking care of our watershed. If you can slow it down, an example of that is if you go out in your backyard and you got a hill in back of you, if it's bare dirt and it rains, you're going to get flooded. A bunch of dirt and mud comes down the hill. But if it's planted with grass or a range grass, it won't do that. It'll stay there and it'll sink into the ground. The ground becomes a sponge, and that sponge retains that water, and a lot of it leaches down into the aquifer, which recharges the groundwater. So the program that I'm putting together takes into consideration all of this, and not just on a small level, it's a countywide level. And what I'm doing is putting together a program, and it'd be a pilot program for the state if they choose to accept it, and for a 3-year study on how we can manage our watershed as a county, which would definitely increase the economic viability around here. It would also improve our agriculture abilities by probably up to 10-fold. It would also reduce the wildfire probably by up to 80% or even more, actually. So, and then of course, if you look at your backyard, if you manage it right, you got healthy things happening out there, right? There's frogs, animals, all kinds of good stuff happening. If you let it go, it could burn down easily because it's overgrown. Animals aren't too healthy, are happy because it's not a healthy environment. So the one thing that this does as well is it gets people collaborating on every end of the spectrum. So you got your environmentalists that realize this. You got your I call them enviros and capitalists. That's the easiest term for me. And so these folks over here, they also understand that we just can't operate like we've been operating for the past 80 years or so. And so if we put together a comprehensive plan, and I believe the state is looking for that now, then we can become be in control of our own destiny through our own economic plan. So that's what I've been working on. There's a lot more to it, including cogeneration of electric power, biosolids, being able to compost biosolids for soil amendments so that we can reintroduce them to our own farmland that would be actually increased because of the ability to have that water more readily available. And I think that the whole county could benefit from that, and that's economic development, and I think that that's part of what we're talking about.
Yeah, as you're describing it, I'm looking at the main bullet points, and it probably meets, the criteria of 3 or 4 of the categories: improve public health, security, viable, livable, healthy communities, practicing environmental stewardship, all of that. I'm not quite sure, what is it that you're asking of us tonight? You said that you were going to submit all 3 projects?
So I would like direction to assist the county in the development of the grant applications, and they're going before their governing boards during the month of October to get official approval for these priority applications. They would be submitted October 31st. The watershed management plan would be a partnership planning grant. The Calaveras Council of Governments would be the lead agency on that grant, and we would be looking for a sub-recipient agreement from the county should that grant be awarded. The other grants are sustainable communities grants, whereby the local jurisdictions can apply for those directly. So the only thing that we're asking for is to provide support for their grant applications. I'd like to write letters of support for the city and county applications, and I'd also like the time and resources to contribute our workload to helping them write these grant applications. And that's what we're asking for.
Well, I guess I'm concerned about the last couple of statements in the report where it says COG is considering the best funding opportunities for both grants. In other words, I guess trying to decide which funding source is most appropriate for each of the applications. And then it says, however, the grants may compete against one another. So are you suggesting that maybe we prioritize the grants and maybe only submit one of the three, two of the three, or all?
For these programs, I wouldn't suggest that the COG prioritize. I think first and foremost because the local jurisdictions can apply directly. So the city and county can apply regardless of our support for their sustainable communities grant applications. When we wrote this memo, we were looking at what the scope was and what the city and county hoped to accomplish, and we are considering the potential for any of those applications to go into either program, partnership planning or sustainable communities. We've had an opportunity to talk with John Gedney at Caltrans. I feel comfortable that both the city and county application for the State Route 49 projects should go to the sustainable communities, and I think that they could compete well in that program. And then we would be looking at the watershed management plan for the partnership planning, making the case that this planning effort is of statewide significance, making that project more eligible for that grant cycle. But the reality is, with the approval of the City Council and the Board of Supervisors, they could submit applications independent of COG. I think it's just nice of the Council of Governments that we're able to provide the local jurisdictions with the support to get the funding. And I think with your endorsement also, it gives them a competitive edge because we're not just competing against one another, we're competing against other jurisdictions.
Sure. But I tell you, I like all three. Now that I've heard all three of them, I like all three of them. I particularly like the San Andreas corridor study. I think that could be a real shot in the arm. And of course, I like the project that the city is proposing as well. So, anyway, you've answered my question.
And
We're
ultimately,
not really competing against each other.
No, yeah, I thought you were looking for some direction of, I mean, are we shooting ourselves in the foot if we submit all three? Or is there some sort of a rural set-aside? Are we competing at a statewide level?
I think the best, John, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the best project wins, whether it's from Calaveras, Modesto, StanCog, any other region. And so I think for this particular program, I recommend both city and county projects moving forward for the sustainable and let them compete on each of their own independent merit. But I do recommend the watershed management would be best fit for the partnership planning grant, and I would recommend the other two for the sustainable communities. Ultimately, it's going to be up to the city and county, and should they not support these grant applications, then we would not be submitting them anyway. So,
Was this monies within District 10 or statewide?
statewide.
Statewide.
And actually, the partnership planning funds are federal funds. And I think the only thing that the council should be aware is we look for opportunities, in-kind matches. Staff time is considered an in-kind, and so we would look for opportunities to provide our staff support to the city and county to help them implement these projects, where we could provide in-kind support to them to help with any match funds that they would be required to provide. There's an 11.4% match on the partnership planning and a 20% match on the sustainable communities. And at this point, the jurisdictions have not requested the council provide those matches.
And that also ties into addressing the objective, that last objective under our previous discussion. Interagency cooperation.
and being a convener as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's good. We help get our goals. So. Okay, is there any public comment on this item?
I'm sorry.
You ready to go?
Cliff, have you reached out to CCWD under our management plan or the groundwater?
Getting ready to do that.
Okay, so that's something in the works too.
I've actually talked to a couple of the board members,
Okay.
just run it across them, and that's a pretty good response. But it's.
I just know we've done a lot. We've done some work on this already as well, and even had a seminar, I think that you attended earlier this year at the at San Andreas Town Hall.
Yeah,
addressing
that was a
decision.
year ago.
Right.
Yeah, they had that. That's kind of, it didn't go anywhere. And
It
so-
was informative.
Yeah, it was very informative.
Right.
And I actually plan on gathering those folks back up again
Mhm.
because we need to continue.
Okay.
But we didn't have a plan. You know, there was no program in place. I mean, there were small plans. If you look throughout Calaveras County or anywhere else actually, through San Joaquin, Calaveras, and our surrounding counties, there's about 200 different agencies working on the same thing, only in a little
Regionalized areas.
small area. Right? So you'll never, they don't connect the dots. Again, we were talking about connecting the dots. They don't do that.
Right.
This connects the dots, and it actually has an outcome that is beneficial to our county.
I just want to encourage you that reach out to be there because I know we have put a lot of time
So
and
you
energy
guys,
into that.
I actually, I was actually going to go talk to Pearlie tomorrow.
Bill might not be the easiest, no, the right one to talk to though. There's a couple others too. Okay.
All right, any public comment on this item? Okay, well, it seems clear, Melissa, you have direction to go ahead and pursue, a grant application for all three of these projects.
Thank you.
All right, very good. Any other comments? Okay, let's move on. Item number, let's see, where am I at here? I think I'm on item number 9, Calaveras Transit Maintenance and Organizational Analysis Working Paper. This is a discussion of possible action as well. Ms. Collins, would you lead the discussion, please?
Work on the short-range transit plan began in February of 2014 by Mobility Planners. As you know, the short-range transit plan evaluates the operations and performance of Calaveras Transit and includes a 5-year operations, capital, and financial plan. The contract was amended in March to incorporate a comprehensive evaluation of Calaveras Transit's costs, including maintenance, contract operations, and administration. The resulting work product of amendment number 1 is a working paper identifying the cost structure issues, peer review comparison of costs, and tangible strategies the COG and county might consider to bring the cost per vehicle service hour down. This is included as attachment 1 to the memo. The working paper was provided to the Interagency Transit Committee for review and comment. COG staff also met with the ITC in August and September to discuss issues and concerns and identify any changes to the report. The ITC comments and our response to comments is included as attachment 2 to this memo. And before we move on to the presentation, just quickly, it was brought to our attention on page 15 of our response to county comments. We stated the COG agrees that the county should continue operation of the transit system. We're going to strike this out since was never supported by any formal action by the council.
Where is that on 15?
Page 15 under 10, the second paragraph. It states the COG agrees that the county should continue operation of the transit system,
Okay,
and we recognize this.
all right, so you're striking that out.
Yeah.
Okay.
These
All right.
were based on staff discussions, so
Right.
the COG board was never asked to make any formal action, and the purpose of the study and the investigation have all been staff-related discussions, so we wanted to make that clear.
Very good. Okay, so Mr. Chambers, welcome. You're going to give a presentation. As I understand it, you want to go about 20 minutes. So we will try to keep within that framework. We have a couple of staff reports still to go this evening and then a closed session. So welcome to our meeting, and the floor is yours.
Okay. Okay,
Well, thanks for having me here. This is part of the short-range transit plan, and we really would like your input and discussion and direction of where we'd like to take some of these findings and strategy development as part of the short-range transit plan. So there were basically three purposes of what we did in this working paper. The first is to really understand the factors of why Calaveras Transit costs went from almost $70 an hour in 08-09 to about $114 an hour in 2012-13. And the reason we're using 2012-13 numbers is that's the last audited numbers. We actually had audited numbers to base that on. As part of our scope, we're asked to basically look at the cost elements for other pure rural transit agencies. So we have done that. And finally, and most importantly, was really to review and discuss strategies and how you can operate Calaveras Transit in the most cost-effective manner as possible. Throughout this, the working paper, and I defined it in the working paper, but I just want to be clear that the term operating, the vehicle service hour is the operating cost for actually operating a bus for 1 hour when the bus is available for fare-paying passengers. That's what a vehicle service hour is. And the cost is the cost for operating that bus for the 1 hour. In terms of historical perspective, this chart really starts in fiscal year 01-02, and the green line really traces the operating cost per vehicle service hour to 2012-13 and includes basic milestones. And as you've seen in the last 5 years, it's been a steep increase. Back in 01-02, it was below $40 an hour, but recently there's been a very steep increase. The red line represents some of the changes in vehicle service hours that were operated when the Lodi service was initiated. It went up, and it dropped when there was a funding turn down. There was a 40% cut in service, and then it's had a slow decline since. So why does this really matter? So in 2012-13, the actual expenditures were slightly over $1 million. And Calaveras Transit at the time operated 8,700 vehicle service hours for operating all of the various Calaveras Transit routes. That cost $114.51 per vehicle service hour. If you took that same amount of money, that same budget, and you operated it at an average of whether peers for contracted services have, which I'll get into, was $85.58, you could actually operate 11,693 vehicle service hour, which is 33% more service. And many of the things that we're going to be addressing as part of the short-range transit plan, when we did the stakeholder interviews and the onboard surveys, we heard, for example, people really want to have Saturday service. Well, without any additional money, by bringing costs down, you could actually provide more service. So Calaveras Transit, in comparing it to its peers, I have to first start off that Calaveras Transit is fairly unusual in that operations are contracted and the county maintains the service. In most systems, either if they contract for operations and maintenance, and that's contracted services. And directly operated services really mean that the county hires the drivers, pays the county benefits. It's directly operated by the public entity. So we have two different types of services, transit services. Those are contractor services and directly operated services. So the other 8 peers that we looked at really were one of those two camps, where they're either contracted for both operations and maintenance, or they directly operated all the services. And Calaveras Transit is a hybrid. But under contract services, where you're contracting for operations, which you currently do through paratransit services, the low is $65.53 per hour, and the average was 85.58, and it ranged as high as 114.51 is where Calaveras Transit are. For directly operated services, the actual range is slightly higher. So we looked, in terms of this analysis, at 5 major categories of costs. And 2 of those costs are the contract that you have with paratransit services, the operator fixed costs, which include all the costs like the general manager and the dispatchers. It's irrespective of the amount of service that you provide. The operator variable costs are essentially the driver costs, which vary depending on how much service that you provide. And that represents about 58%. Then you have maintenance is about 17%. We didn't really do any analysis of fuel because we pretty much pay for the cost of fuel what the market bears, and then the county administrative costs. So I'm going to go through the key points of our management review, the strategies for each of these. The contractor operator fixed costs were about 31% of the total costs, as I mentioned earlier. Yet in terms of looking just at the contracted services, in terms of the peers, for 5 contracted services, Calaveras Transit was at the high end of 35.63. It ranged down as low as 22.17, and the average was $28.42 per vehicle service hour. So Calaveras Transit did have the highest among the peer group that we looked at. One of the reasons for that is when we looked at the operations and management RFP, it really did represent a staffing plan that really wasn't correlated to the amount of service that was really being provided. There were a lot of prescriptive terms that are described in more detail in the working papers, such as the dispatching staff not, having to be dedicated. Calaveras Transit includes $4.20 in the operations and maintenance facility cost. Most of the other systems either own, most of the other peer that we looked at actually own their operations and maintenance facility, don't have that as part of operating costs. And I have to say, when we rode the vehicles, when we were here earlier this year, rode all the routes, the contract really brings significant professional transit leadership to Calaveras Transit, and they're doing an overall very good job. The strategies are fairly simple. You can expand the number of service hours without increasing the actual fixed cost. And there's 2 options within that. You can issue a new RFP. The current contract ends at the end of June 2015. Or you can renegotiate the contract with paratransit services. Well, the county is actually in the progress of renegotiating the contract. You've increased service to Ranchos Calaveras. You're going to be providing service to Stockton. So your hours will increase, and so they're renegotiating right now. I don't know what the result of that contract negotiations will be, but that's underway. The other is to basically reevaluate the transit management functions that the county has versus the contractor. And I'll get into that a little bit more, but that's actually happening right now. And finally, there's a feasibility analysis for actually a county-owned operations and maintenance facility, which is just starting some initial investigations. So I just want to show the example of what one of the strategies does with expanding the number of service hours without increasing fixed costs. So the red bar is where Calaveras Transit was at in 2012-13. The peer is 28.42. If you kept the fixed cost for Calaveras Transit constant, as just an example, it's currently in negotiations now, and you added the Rancho Calaveras, which is currently operating, you add the new 5311 service to Stockton, it actually brings the cost down because your fixed cost remain flat. So your cost will go down because of that. The second, major area, which has the second highest percentage cost, is the contractor operator variable cost, which is essentially driver's costs. In here, I'm going to talk about 2 different types of costs. The driver's wages per vehicle service hour. Now, this is not what is paid to the driver themselves. This has to do with So the drivers are paid from the time they clock in. They have to check the buses, start the route, do the route. When they're operating the route, what fares are being paid is vehicle service hour, but then they finish the route and they go on and they have to do the post-trip inspections of the buses for every paid hour. So you divide all those paid hour costs by the vehicle service hours, and that's the driver's wages per vehicle service hour. And the average of that is $18.11. Calaveras Transit as at $23.50. And then the fully burdened driver wages, the difference there is all the benefits that are paid to the drivers and the contractor profit, things like that. That's the fully burdened driver's wages. And the range again is from $21.44 to $32.07 among the peers, and the average is $24.84. So Calaveras Transit is guided by the contract, which has a wage structure for training. And we looked at a couple of peers in terms of how you compare. Peer A had training starting at $8 compared to the training here at $10. And then they increased it by 1% increase per year. Peer B starts out at training at $8.50 compared to year 2, $11.29 compares to Calaveras Transit of $13.23, and so on. The California minimum wage is going to increase to $10 an hour in 2016. So really, you're this is what will be common in agencies, other transit agencies in 2016. So the strategies are such that you can have different specifications in the request for proposal for drivers' wages and benefits. You could have a low bid competition, which I don't recommend. You could actually set a minimum rate and let the bidders determine the rate structure and increases based on market rates. However, the existing drivers need to be paid at their existing wages. You're not going to have, the bottom line here is for this particular cost category, there's not significant opportunity for any really long-term or really even short-term cost savings. In terms of the maintenance review, Halsey King, who's a recognized national expert in maintenance practices, did a site visit with me, came here. He went over the buses, inspected them. They're actually, they're all beyond their useful life at the time, but they were overall in good mechanical condition. However, we really found there's just been a historical lack of overall leadership in the maintenance program. There's been significant staff turnover. When the county took the program of maintenance over, there was really insufficient training for mechanics. We interviewed the mechanics. They didn't have the proper training for a lot of the bus components. There was a lack of goals, objectives, and performance standards. The shop hasn't adopted industry standards to capture and report maintenance cost activities. And at the time we were in May, they really didn't have the sufficient level of detail for regular maintenance and inspections by bus. When the county decided they wanted to take maintenance over, they estimated it would cost $50,000. Well, 2012-13, it actually cost $165,000. So there really just wasn't sufficient analysis of what the maintenance costs would be. So this is how it lines up, but I'm only going to talk about the right chart because in maintenance, the costs are really miles based. The more miles that you put on a bus, just like your car, you have to maintain it more. So in terms of Calaveras Transit was about 64 cents. The cost was 64 cents per vehicle service mile. And this is about the average for maintenance for directly operated services. For contracted services, it was slightly lower. The first thing when we were there when we did the site visit in May, there were talk about replacing 2 vehicles. We talked about trying to replace as many vehicles as possible. And I just found out today it's about to arrive. Well, the second bus actually arrived today. So progress is definitely being made. That will have, and when the 2 additional buses are received, you'll have 4 new buses, and it will make a significant difference in a fleet of 7 buses to have newer buses. The county has now hired a fleet manager with experience with transportation fleet, which was a major recommendation that we discussed. The training for mechanics is underway, and then there's a number of items that still have to happen, but the new fleet manager just started last week, so there's a lot still to be done. One of the things, and you were talking about maybe, semi-annual or quarterly reports, one of the things we'll be doing in the short-range transit plan is having some minimum standards and some target standards. So the minimum performance standard we might recommend would be, for example, 52 cents per vehicle service mile, with a target which would be improved is what Trinity Transit has, is 36 cents per vehicle service mile. It's also a county-operated system, so you would have a range to work within that you're trying to move towards that when the fleet is mature. By having those standards and really looking at them carefully and managing it, I really do believe that you'll be able to bring your costs down over time as long as you regularly maintain the fleet and regularly replace the fleet. The other second cost savings are really from capitalizing preventive maintenance costs. And the capital is typically funded, federally funded at 88.53%. By capitalizing preventive maintenance costs, which federal funding allows, you actually are able to save money by capitalizing it and not include it in your operating budget.
Excuse me, can you go back there?
Yeah.
Maybe I just missed it. What is VSH?
Vehicle service hours.
Okay, so it's 9.78 per hour. You guys are logging this by hour, not by miles?
Well, because the rest of this conversation has been on hourly basis. I said maintenance, the main performance indicator is vehicles, the cost per vehicle service mile. So I equated it to vehicle service hours, but I didn't go over that particular target. But the same would be, you'd have a target of 9.78 per vehicle service hour. The minimum standard would be 14.50 per vehicle hour. It's 19.41 now.
Okay, so how do you, what's minimum standard?
Pardon?
What is minimum standard?
Well, a minimum standard would be a floor line. And the best way to talk about it is like a fare box recovery ratio that you have is a 10%. That's a minimum standard. You might want to work for a higher standard. So you might want to work for a fare box recovery ratio with a target standard, perhaps like at 14%. That's the difference between a minimum standard and a target standard is what you're working towards. A minimum is you don't want to go below it.
So, but you're talking about maintenance costs, right?
Yes.
So what's the minimum standard of maintenance costs?
What I'm suggesting here is the minimum performance standard would be 52 cents per vehicle service mile after the fleet matures. That would be the minimum standard.
So it has nothing to do with the standard of maintenance on the vehicles?
No, it's just a performance standard.
If that performance standard was adopted and put in the short-term transit plan, are there any consequences for failing to meet a minimum?
No, it's essentially a board policy, but it allows you, as we'll get into in terms of tracking this, allows you to have some metrics so that you don't get in this situation again. That's the purpose of it. And I'm just trying to illustrate what we're trying to do in the short-range transit plan is to give you some metrics to help you review this on an ongoing basis so that you don't have costs escalate like they did over the last 5 years.
Yeah, so understanding its utility as a metric, it would not adversely affect any of the funding efforts.
No, it's not like fare box recovery ratio that does, obviously. Transit administration is about 12% of the costs. The industry standard is to try to, have somewhere around 15% of the total operating budget be devoted to administrative costs. It sometimes is a little bit higher. In fiscal year 2012-13, where we have the audited numbers, this is when you had an interim transit manager on a contract basis that was just paid $25,000 per year. So the overall administrative costs in 12-13 were a little bit artificially low during that period of time. So you are low. And Calaveras Transit, you know, the cost for administration was really not the issue. It was things like capital project delivery, and things like that that were more of an issue. But I think, you know, overall, I think, you know, I've talked about a lot of these, and time is short. I won't go into many others. There have been some issues in terms of the preparation of the budgets and TDA claims that the Public Works analyst is working with the business manager for Public Works on, and I think they're going to make some progress in that. There's, you know, there was, when we started this project, there were a lot of comments when we did stakeholder interviews about lack of project delivery, lack of ordering buses. You know, they talked about bus shelter implementation in the third phase. So there was some slow project delivery. I did talk about earlier about the reallocation of functions between Calaveras County and the current contractor, Paratransit Services. I won't go over this list, but they are going through this list. They're looking at who's most cost effectively can do each function, how that would work best to have the most cost effective overall management of the system. And to me, that's very important this is happening because I think there's a lot of opportunity for improvement. There's been a lot of action since we were here visiting the maintenance facility in May. The staff has undergone looking at, as I said, the responsibilities. The public work analyst is getting training. She's going to be attending industry conferences. They're working on reality-based budgets for accurate TDA claims. Projects are now moving. They're ordering buses. There's been some movement in the bus route improvement program. Anyways, there's been a lot of movement. They're working on updating the marketing plan, trying to get more riders, a new trip planner. There's been a lot of actions over the last 6 months in this area. So in the full working paper, we simply didn't have time tonight in 20 minutes to go over all these institutional options. But I'd be happy to answer any questions on any of them if you have any questions. So I'm just going to say that Calaveras County is the transit administrator now, and I've given you 4 other examples in the working paper that if you want me to go into any of that during questions and answers, I could be more than happy to do that. But what really is, you know, a key finding in this is really in terms of institutional options, they're really good examples for very cost-effective service delivery for most institutional options. I think looking at the peers, the exception is really when the city and county manage and they actually directly operate it, tends to be about $20 an hour more than the other options. There's the other options, there's good examples of all of them that really provide high-quality transit service delivery. The key to ingredient for success truly is having consistent, professional transit management with a focus on the customer over time. And consistent and, you know, is very important. There's been a lot of really good progress in the last 6 months, as I've said. The check boxes, you know, things that we were talking about in some initial drafts and when we were here in May have been done. There's still things to be done. But, you know, there's been significant momentum in the last 6 months, but this needs to be continued. There needs to be a nurturing of an environment to sustain this type of progress. I've talked about the need for competent and consistent professional transit management leadership. And I think really what's happened in the past, there's a history of it in terms of the chart, of really understanding the implications of key decisions on how that affects your costs. And quite honestly, that really wasn't done effectively. And I think the example being the switch of maintenance to the fleet shop, thinking it was going to cost $50,000. That's, you know, and there were other decisions that were being made where the governing body which is Calaveras County, I don't think they had a really full grasp of the implications of some of the decisions that were being made on the cost. So I think that's really important to continue. And the SRTP, as I said, will provide minimum performance standards, metrics for you to look at that you can regularly monitor, whether you want that on an annual, semi-annual, or quarterly basis. And finally, you have a really good contractor here in Calaveras County. Paratransit Services is doing an excellent job. They have a lot of expertise, and I think the county is trying to harness as much of that expertise as they enter into some of these renegotiations for the next 2 years. So, try to keep this within 20 minutes. There's a lot of material here, I realize, and there's a lot to absorb. I think the key here for me is that there's been a lot of progress in the last 6 months since we started talking about a lot of these issues and addressing some of these key issues. And I do believe, next fiscal year, the cost per vehicle service hour can come down, and most likely will come down based on the actions that are currently being taken. But we would really like to know if there's anything in particular you would like us to address in more detail or spend more time looking at as part of the short-range transit plan process over the next 3 months.
Okay, time for your questions or comments on a very thorough analysis, I believe, of our transit system. So very, very good, Cliff. Thanks for coming. Yes?
Yeah, I have some questions. Going back to one of your slides where you talk about the maintenance cost history, where it was at 160,000. Those costs for salaries, is that the fully benefited cost of county maintenance people? Salary and retirement
Are
benefits?
you talking about here the maintenance cost components?
Yeah, shop labor, 77,000. Is that fully benefited costs or just salary itself?
That's shop labor, yes.
Fully benefited?
Yes.
Okay. Does it also include indirect costs that normal departments charge other departments for? Not only do you pay the direct cost of the employee, but you pay a portion of the supervisor, and you pay a portion of the county council, and a portion of the finance department as well. Are those fully loaded costs?
I believe they are.
I believe this would just be the cost for maintenance, within the
It is
12% admin.
But he's asking about the maintenance cost.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Is there-
when
yeah.
one department bills another department, they typically
We do
load
have 87,
And
yeah.
that was captured in their admin time of the 12, but it was understated because the transit manager was the contracted and was only 25,000. Now I think the 14-15 budget has it budgeted, using the public works staff at 91,000. So that will be realized in the next.
But we're talking just about maintenance
Yeah,
right
just
now.
maintenance.
Yeah.
Admin for that 887 and paying the public works, transit also pays the public works department to have their transit manager in the department, a certain amount also.
Right.
And so when I bring the claim to you, it'll show by line item what is paid in 887 and what is paid to the department for reimbursement.
Just to comment, there's a shop labor rate of about $85 and change, which incorporates all of the costs to run the entire shop. The shop also works on integrated waste and on the road department. So we have a labor rate that's charged to all of the divisions, including
It's a
transit.
uniform rate.
Exactly, and it incorporates all of the costs to run the entire shop, which does include 887. So the overhead is incorporated, excuse me. Okay.
Is there kind of an implicit understanding here that maintenance functions will continue to be provided by the county under?
Well, the county is investigating whether to keep it within the county, or, as far as I understand from email correspondence, they're looking at potentially including that when they're renegotiating the contract with Paratransit Services.
Yeah.
I'm not privy to that information in terms of where those negotiations are, but they are considering it.
Yeah. I just can't believe that the county in-house maintenance staff could compete with the private sector. Just given the nature of public agencies and the cost of running public agencies, I would think contracting out in this case would be more advantageous.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, here's the chart that you can look at, and, an hourly, the cost per vehicle service hour, and the cost per vehicle service mile. Part of the reason for the incredible range that you have is there's a lot of local circumstances with, it has to do with the age of the fleet that it's in. It's impossible to compare apples to apples. But, I mean, I think, overall, if I've seen this where Trinity Transit is a directly operated system, and they have county hired mechanics with fully benefits, and they're at the low end. That's the 36 cents per vehicle service mile. It's a very similar situation here as Calaveras County. So it can be done, and it has been done. And as I say, I think it's really more about consistent leadership and management of controlling costs and looking at costs. They didn't really have anybody when they made the transition, they didn't have anybody in the fleet shop who was familiar with transit vehicles. So, and then let the vehicles go well beyond their useful life. They went beyond it. Well beyond is probably overstated, but they were all beyond the useful life. So you want to replace the vehicles when they get to their useful life.
Right.
Or you're going to have, it's like your car. You start running your car and you get more and more maintenance issues for the average person. And the same is true with buses. It has more mechanical costs. And so those costs will come down when they replace the vehicles. You've got somebody now, and if they can control the cost, you can get it down. As I say, the target could be 36 cents per vehicle service mile with a good maintenance program. So when the county did go out to bid for a maintenance contractor after they made the decision to take it in-house, when they realized the costs were not as high, and it was around $160,000.
Yeah, I find that so surprising. Maybe it wasn't a real, timing was wrong, maybe it wasn't a convenient time, good competitive situation.
With good management, I've seen it really work well in both situations.
Well, bottom line is, if you're going to have somebody that works on those buses, they have to have certain qualifications.
Yes, they do.
You're not going to get them cheap. $85 an hour?
That's reasonable.
I mean, you can't even find that in your shop around here. You go to outside shop, it's going to cost you a minimum of $90 to $110 an hour around here for cars. That's not buses. So that, but I also know that at the beginning of last year, they had 2 engine replacements that we had, and that cost a big bundle of money right there. And there has been some transitional opportunities. So, I believe that once they get running, then, I think it's a good time to really take a look at it again. Once they get operating the way they should be operating, I think they're headed in that direction right now. But $85, I have a hard time believing that we can actually do it that
they
cheap.
haven't changed that rate in a while, and it's not saying that that's locked in at $85 an hour. It can easily go up, and it probably will go up, like everything goes up. So but that has to be, the county really needs to think about this in terms of their own calculus of whether they're going to keep, maintenance in-house. What's a reasonable standard to meet? Can they meet that standard? Do a full, analysis of cost versus having a contractor do it. And in a small system, there's a lot of pros on each side for doing it, keeping it within the county or contracting it out. But they need to do a good analysis in terms of what the comparative costs are. And you certainly have an opportunity to review that as at the Calaveras Council of Governments.
Okay, let me bring Bob up here. Let me hear your comments.
Hello, good afternoon. I want to begin with letting you know that getting into the document at first was a bit difficult for me. I've read a lot of analyses and done all sorts of things for years. And I remember even in high school, we were warned not to rely on small sample sizes to draw strong conclusions. And so that being said, it was recognized within the document that it's difficult to make comparisons with other organizations. Few were found, 9 peer organizations. The statement was made that based on the small number of rural transit agencies, the sample size is relatively large and representative. But when you look at it, I guess, for example, page 20, 5 contract operator rural systems were compared. So I guess you can say it's a relatively large and representative if you have a sample size of 2. So it would have been nice to have a larger sample size. It's the nature of the business that's what we have. It was difficult to compare apples to apples. Nevertheless, we're assured that this is a transit industry standard, the way you look at these figures. To me, the strength of the study is not so much in the figures and ratios and all that. To me, the strength comes in the strategies that are presented. And in those strategies, it validates, for the most part, the things that we are undertaking, the direction that we're going. For example, renegotiating contracts. There is the Stockton Intercity Service that we're implementing, and that will affect the bottom line there. We are initiating planning for operations and maintenance facility that was recognized in the OWP. We have purchased vehicles. That also will greatly affect the dollar amount there. In practice, we have a transit manager within the county, and then there's the operations manager that is for the buses themselves, the paratransit system, who's doing that work that's separate from what the transit manager is doing. Cliff had the slide that shows those differences. So we're looking at those relationships and responsibilities so that there isn't this overlapping that you seem to have found by looking at the RFP. The RFP was prescriptive, trying to solve a problem. In practice, we're not going in that direction. So I must say, and thank you for the acknowledgement that paratransit is providing a high-quality service and that they are bringing significant professional transit leadership. They're good at what they do, providing the service. I think that if we had perhaps lower paid drivers, the public would not be as well served as they currently are. We definitely want drivers that are responsible people, and to do that, we need to pay a little bit more. So I wrote a few things here in terms of our steps forward and what we've accomplished in the last 6 months, but I don't want to reiterate something that Cliff has already stated in pretty finely there. As far as the institutional options of retaining transit in Calaveras County and all, we are on our way now. We are progressing. I think we have systems in place to keep this transit system operating efficiently. And at this point, I think that trying to change that would add costs that would hurt the system. What I could tell you at the bottom line here is that we're committed to provide the service, and we are also committed to accountability, which is something that perhaps a greater effort needed to be done. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Bob. Any questions or comments while Bob's still there? Did you have?
Robert.
I always call him Bobby. So now it's Bob.
Is that all right, Bob?
Is that right,
That's
Bobby?
okay.
See?
Just call him, just please call
But,
him.
I'm just used to
but he's
Robert.
the only one that can do that.
So Cliff was saying that there's opportunity for greater hours of operation without adding costs. Is that what you were telling me?
Okay, so they are planning to implement the service to Stockton. I was using 12-13 numbers. In 13-14, they implemented the Rancho Calaveras service. There also is finding of unmet need that there's a reasonable need. They're going to be extending service to Burson. A lot of this has just been happening, so it wasn't incorporated into anything else. Those will add hours. So it really depends on the negotiations that they have with paratransit services for the contract extension for 2 years. Because under the contract terms, if you increase hours about a certain amount, it opens up negotiations. So they're going to be negotiating with paratransit services, and it will be dependent on what the fixed costs are, because that's, as you saw, was the highest cost component.
Okay,
And
so I think that we're heading in a lower cost situation according to what I've seen as far as maintenance goes and all that. But I just want to let you folks know that Delta College and Columbia College are in a mode to collaborate in Angels and San Andreas. And so I think the way it's going, their goal is going to be able to bring the post-secondary education here up to AS degree, plus a lot of technical training. And there's going to be a need for transit between the city and San Andreas because they're going to offer classes in both places, I believe. I mean, that's the goal I think we're going. So I think that we should also consider that for the future. That's opportunity, I think. And then, so that's, we start getting more students, then we will have more fuller buses. And then, so you may not have to add service, but you might have to change the service a little bit, maybe even, just maybe change the scheduling or maybe even add a couple of runs. We don't know that yet, but I really believe that they're going to start ramping this post-secondary education up here.
Those issues are the types of issues that typically come in the short-range transit plan analysis.
In fact, we finished work on a research report that will result in the onboard survey and the results of the stakeholder interviews and the focus groups that we had. And now I'm working right now on a service alternatives working paper that will address exactly those kinds of issues that we discovered during that process. And I hadn't heard about Delta College, so I need to find out more about that.
Okay, we're about 45 minutes into this discussion. Let me see if there's other board members that have a question or a comment or direction to staff. John? Anybody else? Is there any public comment on this item?
I'm Kate Allen. I'm an alternate citizen member of the board, and by no means an expert on transit at all, but just wanted to provide my instincts a little bit looking at this. First, I'd like to really, I think, congratulate the county on the job that they have done in the maintenance department, knowing that the fleet is old and they didn't know what they were doing and all this that comes out in the report, and they're still having good numbers. I think that needs to be congratulated. I also applaud the county for the work that they've done in the last 6 months. I think it's great progress. However, going forward, from the report, what I gather is it's not so much the maintenance costs, it's the issue. To me, it's the leadership and it's the governance of Calaveras Transit, and I think it really needs to be talked about, whether or not there needs to be some changes made. for me, I look at the county right now and I say, man, they just lost another interim public works director, so we have another interim public works director. I don't know if anybody's filled Robert's position. I'm assuming they're just one man down. You know, we have a fleet manager that was just hired. I hope they stay. None of the other ones did. So I just don't know in the long term if we can kind of sustain the progress that has been made in the last 6 months. And I'm afraid that the county's plate is so full that it's too much. That it's too much for them to do at the level that I would like to see Calaveras Transit operate. And I have to tell you, I've been really discouraged by the performance of Calaveras Transit over the last year. Hardly any of the changes that I've tried to suggest, both when Scott was here as a transit manager and after, have been implemented at all. I think the marketing outreach has been poor, to say that, to say it kindly. I think that the service has been obviously decreasing and the costs increasing, and it hasn't had the attention that it's needed, and it's not because the county doesn't care, it's because they are understaffed and overworked. And I don't see that has changed. I see it getting worse. And so I think that some of these ideas about forming joint powers of authority or partnering with the regional transit really needs to seriously be thought of. Otherwise, I'm afraid that we're going to have this same conversation next year and the year after that, because I don't see the county's job getting any easier. They have some new buses, which is great, so that might be easier to manage for a couple of years. But in terms of staff changeover and turnover, our record is so poor that I just don't see that consistent leadership that Cliff is talking about happening in the county. And maybe we need to ask for help and partner with our regional transportation people or form some type of other governing body so that the burden is not all on the county, because I'm just not sure that they have the capacity to do it right now, even though I know that they want to be accountable, they want to get it done. I just know that they are accountable for a whole lot of other things, and I think Calaveras Transit gets put a little bit on the back burner, which is sad to me. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kate.
Way more than 2 cents there, Kate.
Anyone else? Well, let me just conclude, with my own comments. This is such a vast and deep subject that you can't get through it all in one evening. I mean, I think, Mr. Chambers Cliff did a very good job, laying out the issues. But we could spend another hour on coming up with strategies for solutions, just as Kate has said. I mean, that's really where I'm more inclined to want to go. I mean, I think that there's been enough blame over the past 12 years, since I've been involved with this subject, for everyone to share some culpability in what we have here is what we call a transit system. I'm not exactly sure that I agree that that's even what we should be calling it. It's extremely difficult to have a transit system in a rural county like Calaveras. It's extremely difficult to provide a service like this with so few people that can access it, that you're going to drive up costs like that, never meet the 10% fare blocks, or have to manipulate things just to do it so you don't get audited and sanctioned. So I quite frankly think that the status of potential strategies needs to come back. You need to spend another 45 minutes on how you're going to get to actually creating a system that will work for this county. I think the report is clear that you have a pretty good contractor, but there's been a revolving door of transit managers just since I've been here in my second iteration on this board. So I don't think you can ever get to the point of providing a vehicle service hour, that's realistic until you get somebody that is really on board to, number one, understand the complexity of the transit system here, and then to work with the provider so that you're able to get people from point A to point B in an economical manner. And you're just not going to do that by will, as Kate has said. Just the desire to do it isn't going to do it. You need expertise. So I really think that my direction to staff would be, you need to bring this back with an evaluation on what the potential strategies are and a recommendation on what is realistic. I mean, this is a comprehensive report. I've never seen one this comprehensive since I've been involved on this COG. So now you have the report. Again, what are you going to do with it? Is it going to go on the shelf? Are we going to do nothing with it? And as Kate said, come back a year from now and wonder why the numbers are not, moving down. So I really think that would be my direction to staff, and I would hope that the rest of the board concurs that you need another at least half hour, 45-minute discussion on an evaluation of what your strategies are and how you're going to get there. That would be my comments.
Can I just ask, because I pointed out a lot of different strategies that the county is undertaking, and I think what Ms. Allen was talking about was potential institutional changes, and what she was saying is questioning whether or not, over time, whether the county can really provide the kind of consistent, professional transit leadership that is really needed, that quite honestly wasn't there because of all the turnover that you just mentioned. So it's really in terms of, by strategies, are you talking about the different institutional strategies, or are you talking about more specific, cost-related strategies?
I think I'm talking both, but I'm really more inclined to want to talk about what kind of a regional, transit system we could come up with, working with Amador County and Tuolumne County, and seeing if they are even interested in trying to collaborate on something that would make a strategic change on how you provide interconnectivity to these three counties. I mean, that's something that we talked about at our strategy session earlier in the year, and I think it has merit. Because if you continue to have to take TDA dollars and try to massage the system that works here and spend a tremendous amount of dollars for a limited amount of ridership, you're always going to be facing the kind of problems that you have right here. And quite frankly, Cliff, I've been on this board in various other iterations and seeing where COG is in charge of transit, and then it bounced back to the county, and they went in charge of it, and then it came back to the COG. And I mean, there's all kinds of these machinations that have been tried, and so it's just right now sort of the flavor of the year. Calaveras County has it. They have desire, but they don't have the personnel, or they don't have the expertise. As you have pointed out, you have to have somebody with expertise running this thing. So now we have a person that has been assigned the task, and now they have to go to training, they have to do some classes. Well, how long is that going to take to come up to speed? I mean, to me, we've been talking about this problem for a long time, and this exposes everything that I've always known about public transit in this county. So now what are you going to do with it? I mean, that's the idea. You've exposed it. You've pulled the clothes right off. So, I mean, it's just like, now what are you going to do? I mean, so I really think that you need to come back with a holistic approach on what the recommendation is on how to help the county and the COG come up with a solution to how you provide, a reasonable service at a reasonable cost.
Paul, man?
Yes.
One of the things that I gleaned from this report is it was kind of a shotgun approach in that you had an analysis based on audited figures from several years ago. You had some recommendations and some acknowledgments of things that are happening the last 6 months, to even stuff that just happened in September this year, last month, this being the 1st of October. As direction of the staff, I think that Robert made some salient points that they've implemented some changes already. The report already acknowledged that some good changes are in play, and that was in the presentation. I agree that we need to revisit this, but I think we're right at the start of our new fiscal year right now. We've already allocated and have a budget working towards making this happen over the next 3 to 6 months. I would like to see this maybe in the spring, so that as we're preparing for the budget for 15-16, we could then say, okay, the county made a lot of changes here in Q1 of 14-15. Now we're in Q3 of 14-15 in the January to March timeframe. I think that gives the county a little bit of time to let their new transit manager get their feet wet, get through the holidays, and get through the spring, and see how they're doing. We do get our our quarterly transit reports, hopefully they'll be timely and we won't be getting 6 months in one meeting as opposed to, and I've seen that in the past in the last year and a half I've been here. So I guess my understanding and takeoff from this report is that because it was both looking at such a snapshot of several years ago at the 12-13 audited numbers, and then the presentation being based upon even the last 6 months of some significant changes. I mean, yeah, I can certainly agree. New maintenance costs are going to be very different when you have 4 new buses on a 7-bus fleet than they were even 2 years ago when you were replacing engines in buses because the buses were past their service life. So I think let's give the county a chance at least for the next 6 months. That's not an extraordinary amount of time based on the history we've seen, but I would like to see them get a chance to actually see, okay, this is what Robert's come forward with. They've hired a transit manager dedicated to go ahead from Public Works to make this work. Let's give them a chance to do it and look at this in the spring before our next budget year. That would be my take on this.
Any other comments?
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
I was just going to ask, kind of consistent with what John's saying, what is the timeline for the negotiations with the new contract?
We're working on those negotiations right now, so it might be, I'd say maybe a couple months or so. We have to dial in the person run, implement the Stockton intercity run, and then those items will be included in that negotiation, along with a look at whether maintenance goes, maintenance stays.
So the negotiations may be completed by January, then the contract would go to the Board of Supervisors sometime March, April?
Yeah, that sounds, it may be sooner.
So part of your negotiations is the thought of outsourcing the maintenance?
Yeah, we'll have to look at that.
It's already been looked at.
Debbie, do you have something?
Yeah, I kind of agree with everything that's been said here. You know, bottom line, I think it comes down to the stability of the leadership and the management. And there has been a tremendous amount of change in the year and 8 months I've been on board, and you know, so I agree with John at this point. A 6 months to see where we are as we can negotiate these things, see where we are in regards to the staffing, whether or not we do maintenance in-house and such. But you know, I'm to the point too where, you know, what Kate said tonight, it's like, are we going to come back a year from now and be looking at the same thing? So, you know, I'm okay with giving it that 6 month window to see where we are, where it's going with it. But I think there really needs to be a very hard look at what we want this agency to look like as we move forward. Either it's the regionalization approach, a JPA of sorts, a standalone agency, something, because it has gone back and forth for 4 or 5 years. I remember sitting in this boardroom 2 years ago, and you know, a month later or a week later, the person who was running it resigns. And so it's been a rocky road for 2 years. And, you know, it gets down to, you know, you mentioned there about the leadership and, you know, someone who knows transit. I mean, that's what it takes. This is a very unique kind of position, and especially unique for a rural area. You know, I don't know if it's any easier in an urban area or city area, but for up here, I see it on that end. I have people who ride transit to work. I have residents who want to go to San Andreas and how the system works and all of those things. It's just a very complicated transit system for a rural area. So I'm okay with 6 months, but you know, in 6 months, it's really going to have to be proving to me that we have something that carries us into the future, whatever that looks like. But I'll be curious to see what we look like in 6 months.
The other issue is, even if you were to try to outsource it around here, it's not as easy, I think, as people think it is, because we are limited on resources up in this area. Maybe somebody would want to, a larger company might want to have an offshoot of an outsource up, or outsource position up here. don't know. I seen it happen with our waste management company, Cal Waste. They're struggling in this area. Good thing they have a bigger area to cover, you know. So, yeah, and I agree also with Kate. We need to have you know, stability in the future. And as Debbie said as well. But I also believe that we have been working in that direction in the past year and 8 months. And although we seem to have had the exodus of some people, we do have our core group of folks, and some of the folks that did exit, we still have our core group of folks, and they are now in charge, and they seem to be a little bit more stable than we have been in the past. So I would like to do the 6 months at least, and see where we stand at that point.
Okay, anyone else?
I guess I would only add that, you know, things don't happen overnight. Even if we were to just kind of put this on hold for 6 months, as County Public Works, they're going to continue their discussions and renegotiate their contract. If this board were to try to develop a recommendation for a more regionalized approach, that's not going to happen overnight. That's going to take a year, 2 years before that can be implemented. So I would say, you know, applaud the efforts that County Public Works is doing right now. Let them continue their discussions. But yet, let's just not forget about this completely. We can still have our own strategy discussion. I don't see a need to wait 6 months to do that. I would say there's no real urgency, but whenever it's convenient. And let the two processes go concurrently, and we'll make our recommendation that, you know, once we conclude our
There's no reason not to explore it anyhow,
yeah,
especially the regional deal.
So I think that what we might be able to do is a combination of the two approaches. We're right in the middle of the short-range transit plan update. I think with this discussion, I will get together with Cliff and with Amber and look at how we might incorporate this discussion into that short-range transit plan update and the schedule for that, and then revisit again the discussion in 6 months, if that's okay with the board.
Okay, I think that's fine. We need to move off of this topic unless there's any other comments.
Is that okay with you, Cliff?
Thank you, Cliff.
Thank
Very
you.
good. Thank you, Amber, for bringing this to the board. Okay, I'm going to move on to item number 10. We still have a few reports to go before our closed session, which will be our break.
Matt Satow will be providing the county report. He has a few slides on the wagon trail, and we promise not to take more than, how much did I give you?
All right, good evening. I know, good evening, council. And I know that you have a lot on your plate tonight, so I am going to make this even shorter than I'd planned, really straight to the point for you. You know, I realize we give you quarterly updates, written updates, and those updates it's really hard to convey in those updates really the sheer amount of work and effort that's gone into this project, the successes that we're having, and the momentum behind this project. So the reason I'm here tonight is I just really want to be able to convey that to you. I know Amber went to sleep again, but that's okay.
They also have the PowerPoint in front of them.
Okay, great.
So they do have it as it's warming up.
So tonight, I'm really going to shorten up the background of this project. As I look at the council, I realize most of you have seen me and seen this project and know quite a bit about the project already, so I'm going to shorten up that portion of it. Really get more into the update of what's been going on in this project in 2014 and since the last time I've been before this council, and some of the key milestones that are coming up that you need to be aware of. And then we'll just touch briefly on the funding strategy that this board set into place last year, late last year. Let's go ahead and flip 2 slides ahead. That's just really showing the vicinity. This is State Route 4 between Copperopolis and Angels Camp. It's about a 6.5-mile stretch that we're essentially looking to. As you can see, the white up there this is an aerial view looking down. Existing State Route 4, the wagon trail through this section, has very tight curves, limited sight distance for drivers through this section, It contributes to some of the accidents that occur along this stretch. The whole point of this project, we're going to improve this to current state standards with standard width shoulders, standard lane widths, and standard amount of visibility for drivers and sight distance to be able to look ahead and make good decisions in driving through here. Really, since the last time I was before this council, some of the things that we've been doing, we spent a lot of time meeting one-on-one with folks. We had actually it's almost been a year to the day since last time I was here. It was October 2nd last year. And shortly after that, we had a public meeting, and we had about 50 folks show up, residents, stakeholders to this project. What came out of that meeting was a lot of one-on-one meetings with those folks. There were concerns at the meeting. We went out there, as we have with most people out there, we've gone out there and met one-on-one with them and resolved a lot of these issues. So a lot of the time this last year has been spent doing that, just really refining the project, trying to make those alternatives, each alternative as best as we can for the people out there. Along with that, in my last report, I told you that we had run into some roadblocks of trying to get out there and conduct the environmental studies. Well, we got through that in 2013. We conducted the environmental studies. All the things you see up there, I'm actually happy to say tonight, all of these studies have been turned into Caltrans. They have either been approved or in their final review and approval round right now. Which is really a significant milestone and part of the reason why we wanted to come here and share this with you, because this is a big deal. When we look at where we are in this process, right now we're ready this month, and I put November just to be safe, but I believe October this month, we're going to be submitting an administrative draft document to Caltrans. That's essentially the draft environmental document. It goes through a lengthy process once it goes to Caltrans. It goes through various different technical reviews, as well as review on a legal end to ensure that we met the requirements of the California Environmental Quality Act, as well as the National Environmental Protection Act. When we get through those reviews at Caltrans, essentially our pencils are down at this point. The document is going to be in at Caltrans. When that document gets through that point and we've made whatever revisions and edits are necessary, we're going to be ready to release that draft document to the public in the spring of next year. We're shooting for March. It could run into April depending on how these reviews go. But this is a significant milestone to get to this point where we're at a pencils down point and it's in a review process. And I think this is pretty much what we've told folks all along, is that we're going to release this document in the spring of 2015. And we are on schedule for that right now. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead one fast, Amber. So once we get to that point, as you know, the process, I won't go through the entire process, but we do hold a public hearing after that point. And the board, the local jurisdiction, can take a position on what is a locally preferred alternative, which we can declare in the document. Caltrans is the ultimate decision maker on this project as far as which alignment is going to be selected. However, they do like to have input from the local agencies in the region as far as what is the locally preferred alternative, and that does weigh with them when they make their decision. So this just graphically shows where we are in the entire process right now. You can see us in kind of the latter part of 2014. We are at that draft document stage where we're turning it in for the checks now and going through the reviews at Caltrans. As we get into 2015, we'll go through that public circulation of the document until towards the end of 2015, potentially into early 2016, when that document reaches a final stage, a final stamp and approval from Caltrans on the document. When we get to that point, we'll move forward into the final design and right-of-way stage for the segment that we have funding for, with the hopes of putting a shovel in the ground in the year 2018. I wanted to touch on that funding strategy, and I apologize, I didn't have the time to modify this graphic completely, and I know this is the same kind of confusing one we showed last year, but what I'm showing there essentially is the section in yellow you see in the middle left there. That's the section around Pool Station Road. And what we really tried to look at last year was where, with the limited amount of funding that this Council of Governments can put together, where can we get the most bang for the public's dollars out here essentially? Where can we have the most benefit with those dollars? And a majority of the accidents that occur out here occur around that Pool Station Road, whether it be to the east or west of it. And so one of the alternatives, if that alternative is selected, we would move forward with designing, we're essentially clearing for environmental, the entire stretch, the whole 6.5 mile stretch that you see up there, for either alternative. And when we get to the design phase, if that alternative is selected around Pool Station Road, we'll design both sides of it. We only have money to construct the section that's clouded in red there, to the west of Pool Station Road. But the strategy behind this is that when transportation dollars become available, they become available to projects that are shovel-ready. And so our goal is to try to get that section to the east of it as shovel-ready as possible, having the design done, having it environmentally cleared. So this is really trying to stretch the maximum amount of your dollars that you have available to you into something that's trying to get the most public benefit on this project. In the meantime, I know Melissa and her staff are still working on trying to find funding and working with Caltrans collaboratively to try and funding for the whole thing. But in the meantime, with the dollars that we know we have, this is the strategy of what we've put forth this time. So I think I kept that well below 10 minutes. I was really just trying to give you an update, let you know that we've really reached an important milestone point, and there's a lot of momentum behind this. I think we've done a lot of, I don't want to pat ourselves on the back, but I think we've done a good job of getting out there, and we're not afraid to talk to folks. We've talked to just about every resident we possibly could out there in trying to make each of these alternatives as best as possible for them. So, and I think that's really helped. I think people now understand where we are with the project. They understand a little more about it. And they'll know more in about 5 months or 4 or 5 months when we release that draft document. They'll know all the impacts of the project. So with that, I'm going to open up for questions if there are any.
All right. Thank you, Matt.
I just wanted to compliment you. I was there that night in Angels when they had the meeting, and somebody had you cornered pretty good.
It's not the first time.
I was just sitting there watching it, and was actually snickering a little bit, but you handled them very, very well, and I appreciate that.
Appreciate it.
You did a good job. Thank you.
Thanks.
Does the environmental document go stale after a certain number of years where we're going to have to re-go and reassess what has been assessed previously?
You're exactly right. So usually we like to use a number of 5 years that a document could go when you say stale, but it doesn't mean that we go back and have to redo the entire document. What it means is we might have to go back and look at air quality again and update the air quality model depending on the traffic. There's a few technical studies that we may have to go revalidate, but certain things won't change during that time. Cultural, we wouldn't have to go back and walk and look for artifacts. Hopefully in that 5 years, there are many artifacts we have to go look for. So there are things that we'd have to go back and look for. But right now, again, we're clearing the entire stretch environmentally with the intent that this is how transportation projects in California get funded. They get funded because you have projects that are ready to go. And money, just from past experience, I know we've heard a totally different story today about how money is becoming a lot tighter, and it certainly will be. But at the same time, I think that we have to take every advantage we have with this for the county and make this project as fundable as possible when those opportunities do come up.
Anyone else?
I just want to thank Matt and the crew he has assembled. It's been nice, very responsive to the public, meeting with people, and I feel in this project it's one of those projects where our money has been well paid because they've been very responsive to the public along the route, in meeting with people many times, walking the land, getting a really good feel and sense of what people's concerns are and being able to address them throughout the process.
Earning that trust of the people, that was tough. That was a tough one. Because when we first went in there, Debbie and I actually had a meeting with the land property owners over there, and we had to listen for the first hour and a half, I think it was. Just listen. Mm-hmm. And so, and then you guys took it on and just started earning their trust, and I think that's really, really important. It was a tough task to do.
And there's been continuity.
Continuity, and again, I stress that momentum of the project because these projects take a long time. It's the nature of doing a transportation project of this size. And so we have to keep that momentum of, we don't want to delay this another year. We don't want to keep pushing this out and out and out because folks lose interest, they forget, and we want to make sure that we're staying in front of them and let them know that we're holding the schedule that we set on this project. It's really important.
Very good, Matt. Anyone else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. All right, let's try to finish the rest of our agenda before we go into closed session. Caltrans report. Mr. Gedney.
We didn't,
Not at this time.
the county had opted to schedule the wagon trail presentation in lieu of their county report. But we can connect with you, Kate, and provide an update.
John, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John Gedney, Caltrans District 10. I'll be even more brief. Just like to comment on a few items that you discussed already this evening, and I would echo your comments on the team on the wagon trail. Certainly, and Melissa, your work on keeping this pushed forward, and Matt's work has been tremendous, and the strategy of trying to get it cleared in case money does become available is certainly a good strategy. We know there's no money right now, but I think it will bear fruit in the future. But if I could just throw a couple of items out there based on the conversation on the transit previously. I know you're well aware of this, but I just remind you that you have two models in adjacent counties that might be instructive to look at, and they may be willing to even come and discuss their models with you. ACTC, their board acts as the transit board. They have a separate transit manager, very strong management style. In Tuolumne, again, the board acts as the transit board. Darren actually wears two hats there in Tuolumne. He's the transit manager, and they just did transition from the county a couple of years ago, so they could probably give you some insight into how onerous that was, or just throw that out there for you. On the other item on the grant, Commissioner Kuhn, you mentioned the watershed idea. I'm fully in. I think this really addresses our statewide goals, especially our new mission for Caltrans, not necessarily transportation centric, but your question on transportation I think is crucial for the success of this application. I did have a chance to talk with our headquarters staff today actually, and they were concerned about that. They note that it does hit some of our new mission statements and our goals and our values of encouraging a vibrant economy, obviously sustainability, but they're questioning the transportation component. And so their caution to me was, as we work in partnership, to have us be able to become a strong partner in this application, we need to hit those points of how it does address transportation improvements. I think we can. We've talked about this at length.
Does that include carbon?
I'm sorry?
Does that include carbon or emissions?
It does, and I think that we have a strong case to make there on emissions and the greenhouse gas reductions. Blueprinting, I think, is one thing that I think we're really basing this on, is the state, Caltrans, has made a very strong investment in blueprinting activities statewide. And this is, I think, a great implementation step of blueprinting, where we're including transportation, land use, water, and energy in a comprehensive look. I think what I'd like to see is that we get a strong proposal from you, Cliff, as soon as we can, and then I can try to bring that to the department and try to get some buy-in that it does meet our comprehensive blueprinting goals, and that doesn't necessarily have to just hit that little niche on transportation, but we do need to address it as part of the comprehensive whole. So I'd like to continue working with you on that in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And then finally, I'd just like to follow up on the conversation that Matt started earlier as COG as a convener. I think there's a great example of Melissa's work, and I got to give Melissa kudos for this, on the O'Burns Ferry Bridge issue. We were stuck with that, and you know much more about it than I do at the local level, on the match requirement for the construction end of it especially. Well, Melissa really stood out and said, how can we look at this a little differently? Is there any way that we could potentially save this project? And no one had a solution, but she convened a meeting as a convener among the county, and thank you, Robert, and consultant, our local assistant engineers met and discussed it, realized it was really an impasse, but there were some ideas that were floated around, and I think we've actually come to a potential path forward that could save that project and not cost the county upwards of $7 million of match money in construction. And I credit Melissa for really convening that and coming to, I think, a really exciting solution to this.
I hope so.
So
Thanks.
hope so.
Thanks, John.
So at that, I'd leave it open to any questions or concerns I could try to address.
Okay, any comments?
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
David?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have one item to comment on, and that's the partnership planning grant. We have an item going to our council, selecting our stakeholders committee, and working with Amber. We're going to be starting the meeting process, getting them started, getting the public outreach going. So it should be a next fun couple of months getting that project started. Other than that, in terms of COG projects, that's all we have. At our next city council, we'll be hearing again the Mark Twain Medical Center. And we're also taking a look at long-term solutions in our northeast quadrant area for transportation areas. So we've got and we're looking at the PSR for 4 and 49. So we've got a transportation agenda pretty much ahead of us Tuesday night. But other than that, unless you have any questions on any city projects, I have those questions.
Any questions, comments? All right, very good. Thank you.
Thanks. There's still some of these.
Okay, let's go to item number 13, staff reports. We'll start with you, Melissa.
COG staff does not have anything further to report at this time.
All right, any council member reports before we go into closed session? No council member reports?
I have only one thing. I'd like to invite COG to a barbecue that's going to be put on by Delta College at the Town Hall here in San Andreas on October 16th at 6 p.m.
October 16th.
Okay, you too.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
October 16th at 6 p.m.
Is what?
It's going to be a barbecue that Delta College is going to put on. You're invited to.
And where is it?
Dave too. It's going to be at the Town Hall in San Andreas. Okay, but if you want to go, please let me know so that I can get your name, because we want to put everybody's name on the list, okay? And so Delta College is putting that on, and I guess, they want to do some public outreach. I think it's a really great idea. I don't know if Columbia is showing up or not. They may.
All right.
Thursday night?
The 16th.
October 16th.
That's a Thursday?
All right, anything else? Okay, we're going to go into closed session. I'm not going to adjourn the meeting because we are going into closed session, so we'll come back out after our closed session. So we're going to take a 5 to 10 minute break until we clear the room and take our video equipment apart. And you probably have some things you want me to sign, so I can do that as well.